I need you to couch everything you hear today within the fact today is Senior Sunday, a time in which we come to recognize graduating seniors. And I remember back where I went to junior high school, you went through 7th through 9th, so whenever you were in 9th grade, it was kind of like you were a senior of junior high school. And so I remember that day walking into the science class for the first time. Little did I know that Mr. Burke was going to not only teach me about science, but he's going to teach me so much more. In fact, he was going to teach me about excellence and how we should strive for excellence. And that was Mr. Burke's legacy to me, to always be striving for just as much as you can, excellence in all that you do. And so not only has that been something that he instilled in me to this day, but he was instilling it in me when I was very young. And that was very important for me. In fact, I started to, and I tried to Google search Mr. Burke to see if I could give him a call and let him know what a legacy he had passed down for me. Any teachers here this morning? We had he was just fantastic. He was able to make science of all things interesting. He was that person, that class that you wanted to go to, that you were excited about going to. Anybody ever have a teacher that they were just excited to be going to? That's the way he was. How do you make science interesting? And yet he did. So much so that you were looking forward to his class every day. Now, we all know that we've had great teachers in our lives, and Mr. Burke, you would have to have somebody that was exponentially, really good to be as good as this guy to give you an idea who he was and what he was about. In fact, I still remember whenever we'd come in for a test, you even looked forward to tests in his room, not because they were necessarily difficult, but he would come in, now science class, and he would hold it up and look very stern, which is not who he was, and he holds up the test, the big pack of him, and goes, "I have created a monster." And he made it fun, even going, you just want to hear him say that. "I have created a monster." And he would say it just like that, and he'd laugh, and then you realize he did. Oh my goodness. Well, Mr. Burke's legacy that was handed down to me was to always strive for excellence in all you do. But he knew that wasn't something that you leave after you're gone, but it's something you do today, because legacy matters. And if you don't hear anything else today, understand this: legacy matters, and legacy matters now. See, so many times we think about legacies of being something we leave in our will, that it's going to be passed down, and there lies the problem. Because it's not just about when you're gone, as this quote from Ray Bradbury talks about. Everyone must leave something behind when he dies, my grandfather said. A child or a book or a painting or a house or a wall built or a pair of shoes made. Anybody have a grandparent, a grandfather that told you stuff like that? I still remember things that my grandfather told me to this day, or what he showed me through his life. And he goes on, or a garden planted, something your hand touched some way so your soul has somewhere to go when you die. And when people look at that tree or that flower you planted, you're there. And it reminds them of you. It doesn't matter what you do, he said, so long as you change something from the way it was before you touched it into something that's like you after you take your hands away. The difference between the man who just cuts lawns and a real gardener is in the touching, he said. The lawn cutter might just as well not have been there at all years later, while the gardener will be there a lifetime. And that's what I've come to confess this morning, that I would prefer to be a gardener than a lawn cutter and leave some kind of legacy that's remembered for a long, long time. One commentator noted that one of the greatest legacies of all time just started out as a spoken word, as simple as that. Those words would be passed down from generation to generation. A father would tell his son, a father would tell his grandchildren, and before you knew it, a legacy was birthed. He goes on to say that communication progressed, picture communication developed, with symbols used to represent objects, activities, places, events, and eventually ideas. But then in 1436, something would happen that would change the face of this earth as we know it. And in 1436, there was a guy by the name of Johannes Gutenberg who developed the printing press. Now, you might not think that's such a big deal, but a printing press made all the difference in the world to every nation that has ever been formed. And that would become his legacy, but he wasn't finished. You see, in 1455, he decided to print 200 copies of the Bible. You see, up to this point, there was no good way for people to get the Bible. There was no good way to teach people to read because they couldn't get printed material passed out in mass. So he decided to print 200 copies of that Bible and forever change the way that we would see Christianity. I had an opportunity to see the Gutenberg, or one of the 200 Gutenberg Bibles. I don't know how many are left. I only think there's a handful. But I got to see one in New York City. Somebody's not going to say it. New York City. And I sat there and I looked at that Bible and I thought, what a legacy. What a legacy. Because that man decided to do something while he was alive, to create the printing press and then print the Bible. My life was forever changed. You see, legacy matters not just in death, in a will that'll be passed on, but the legacy that you're creating now makes a big difference. And when it came to the legacy of the Bible makes it clear that legacy matters. In fact, thanks to great storytellers passing down oral stories around the campfire to their sons and daughters, thanks to the scribes that decided they would actually start to write it down as all the great storytellers started to die off. If they had, they would have carried God's story to the grave, but they wrote it down. Thanks to them and thanks to Gutenberg's legacy of mass printing, we now have the Bible in a multitude of forms. Don't take that book for granted that you even have it in your hand, because for a long time it was only the spoken word, and you would have to be around somebody that knew the word in order to ever hear anything about Christianity. And so now we're going to benefit from their legacy. We're now going to turn to the Bible, and while you're traveling there, I want you to go to the book of Psalms. We're going to be looking at Psalm 78, verse 4. And what you may or may not know is that you want to talk about a legacy. To even go to the book of Psalms is an unbelievable legacy, because we believe they actually used the book of Psalms in worship a long time ago. A long time ago. And in fact, we will use some of the same Psalms that they did, because we know that it's the earliest book of worship, and some of it will be music, some of it will be things that you're thinking, wow, I can't believe that psalmist said that. But that's the beauty of the legacy. The psalmist reminds us that we can be real people in a real world when cruddy things happen and when great things happen, and we can talk to God. We can be angry, mad, glad, sad, scared, and hurt, and it's okay. What they also use that book for, not only singing in early worship, but they used it for responsive reading. Now, we still do that at the 8:20 service, and maybe you've been in a church that does that, where the minister or someone up front will read a sentence, and then the congregation will respond. It's call and response, and that all came from the book of worship in its earliest form, known as the book of Psalms. Now, I'm going to be reading to you from the New Living Translation. You may have different variations of translations, but this is what the New Living Translation says in 78:4. We will not hide these truths from our children. We will tell the next generation about the glorious deeds of the Lord, about His power and His mighty wonders. Now, you want to talk about legacy. We will not hide these truths from our children. We will tell the next generation about the glorious deeds of the Lord, about His power and His mighty wonders. You see, this passage tells us that legacy matters. And it matters now, not after we're dead, but it matters now, which draws the question that begs to be asked. Have you thought about what legacy you are creating right now? Have you thought about the legacy you are creating right now? I heard not long ago there was a story of a Sunday school teacher here, and this person was now an adult, not the Sunday school teacher, they were already an adult, but said that they had been a part of her Sunday school class, and they still remembered fond memories of things that happened in that Sunday school class. They remembered the lessons taught. They remembered the personality of the one teaching it, and they were just so excited about the legacy that one of our own here at Friendship had left with them that they are now doing the same thing with. That's the kind of legacy we're talking about. What are you leaving now? There's some people in the church that if I mention their names, you would have certain connotations that would come to mind. I don't know if you've ever known anybody that looked like they grew a lemon tree out back and they tested them for ripeness every day by biting into them. Anybody know somebody like that? Somebody that, I'm going to be unchristian here, that you just really would not want to address. You don't even want to ask them, how are you doing? Because they're going to tell you. Well, I hate to say it, but there will probably be some people here at Friendship that even now, after I said that, you're already thinking of people that are like that. Is that how you want to be remembered? Or do you want to be remembered by that person that was always positive, and while you could disagree, that you could agree to disagree and still be positive and move forward and keep momentum going? Or you want to be that person that's always known as, that person whenever somebody says something that they said, they say, oh, don't worry about it, they're always negative. Don't even think about it. Just keep going. Legacy matters. What legacy are you creating today? Success Magazine says this about legacy. Legacies come in different shapes and forms, requiring various levels of effort and commitment. Some choose to leave financial legacies supporting causes such as funding breast cancer research or a new building at one's alma mater. Other legacies are institutional, like when somebody founds a nonprofit or builds a business that's a positive force in the community. And all of these examples have their value and place in society. Yet, in his 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, John Maxwell believes in a third, more lasting avenue of legacy. Too often, leaders put their energy into organizations, buildings, systems, or other lifeless objects, says the leadership expert. But only people live on after we are gone. Everything else is temporary. Everything else is temporary. Who are you trying to mentor? What body or group are you leaving a legacy with right now? Now, I have one more confession. Since this is our confession series, I find it appropriate. I've got to confess that during this time of year, when everybody's getting graduation invitations, anybody get a graduation invitation? If you haven't, you will. Some names you'll recognize, some you won't. Send me a gift, please. And so, I have to admit that there have been very few commencement speeches that I've ever enjoyed. Very few. In fact, I'm going to name drop a little bit. One of my commencement speakers at one of the schools that I attended was Mikhail Gorbachev, the Russian. And some of you may not remember that, but that was back when the Berlin Wall was coming down. Ask your parents. And there was a time that was incredible. If you were going to have anybody speak, this guy was the ticket. The problem is I didn't speak Russian. You maybe remember Mikhail, he had the stain right here, and I started to drift. That translator thing wasn't working for me. And I found myself doing that at other graduation times as well. Anybody here ever been to a graduation that wasn't your kids'? Because if it's your kids' graduation, of course, you love it, right? Kind of like a dance recital. There we go. How many of you have ever been to a commencement ceremony that you could have done without? Come on, be honest. Okay, thank you. I've been the same. So here's what happens. I began to think about if I were doing it, if I put myself in their shoes, if I had the opportunity to speak to the graduating class of 2013, the first thing I'd want to do is make it short. I'd want to make it short. And then I would probably, because somebody has always said something better than any of us can ever think of, so I'd probably just quote somebody, a short quote. And then I would probably do something like show a short video that re-emphasizes, because I know, a picture paints 1,000 words and all that. And then here's what I would do. And I stole this idea off the internet, but then instead of everybody coming across, I would have an auctioneer to go through those names as quick as they could. And then I would take all of the diplomas and I would stuff them in a hot dog cannon and just poof. And you just grab you one and we're done. And so if I were to do that, this is what it would look like and sound like, minus the hot dog cannon thingy. Good afternoon, distinguished guests and graduates of the graduating class of 2013. Today I would like to instill into your young minds that legacy matters. And legacy matters now. I think Susan Bosak said it best when she wrote, "Legacy is about life and living. It's about learning from the past, living in the present, and building for the future." Where do you think it's best to plant a young tree? A clearing in an old-growth forest or an open field? Ecologists tell us that a young tree grows better when it's planted in an area with older trees. The reason, it seems, is that the roots of the young tree are able to follow the pathways created by former trees and implant themselves more deeply. Over time, the roots of many trees may actually graft themselves into one another, creating an intricate, interdependent foundation hidden under the ground. In this way, stronger trees share resources with weaker ones so that the whole forest becomes healthier. That's legacy. An interconnection across time with a need for those who have come before us and a responsibility to those who come after us. Legacy is fundamental to what it is to be human. Research shows that without a sense of working to create a legacy, adults lose meaning in their life. Exploring the idea of legacy offers a glimpse not only into human relationships and building strong communities, but also the human spirit. Legacy matters. So as the graduating class of 2013, never forget that it's never too early or too late to begin creating your legacy. I want to end with a short video of Ben Sanders. And as you watch this clip, what I want you to think about is legacy as he indirectly talks about that. And I want you to ask yourself this question: whose eyes are shining because of me? Whose eyes are shining because of you? I now ask that my distinguished colleague, Jody Hooven, come forward as this video begins, and I would like to say congratulations to the graduating class of 2013.
I had an amazing experience. I was 45 years old. I'd been conducting for 20 years, and I suddenly had a realization. The conductor of an orchestra doesn't make a sound. My picture appears on the front of the CD. But the conductor doesn't make a sound. He depends for his power on his ability to make other people powerful. And that changed everything for me. It was totally life-changing. People in my orchestra came up to me and said, "Ben, what happened?" That's what happened. I realized my job was to awaken possibility in other people. And of course, I wanted to know whether I was doing that. And you know how you find out? You look at their eyes. If their eyes are shining, you know you're doing it. You could light up a village with this guy's eyes. Right, so if the eyes are shining, you know you're doing it. If the eyes are not shining, you get to ask a question. And this is the question: who am I being that my player's eyes are not shining? We can do that with our children too. Who am I being that my children's eyes are not shining? That's a totally different world. Now, we're all about to end this magical on the mountain week, and we're going back into the world. And I say it's appropriate for us to ask the question, who are we being as we go back out into the world? And you know, I have a definition of success. For me, it's very simple. It's not about wealth and fame and power. It's about how many shining eyes I have around me.